In this lecture, I'm going to talk with you about the historical context for Shakespeare's Richard III. The subtitle of this lecture is The Body, Monstrosity, and the Tudor Mythos, and the reason for that particular subtitle will become apparent in just a moment. The last time we met in class and in my previous lecture, we talked a little bit about morals and the connection between monstrosity and morals in early modern England. To talk about that, we looked at some broadside ballads. These particular ballads have to do with monstrous births, as categorized in Ebba and also in the language of the ballads. We talked about this in groups in class, and you came up with the fact that like these births were seen as punishment for wrong actions in the parents, most usually the mother. We also looked at the false lover rewarded and pride's fall, and we looked at a couple of ballads about top knots as well. And again, the deformity or monstrosity in these ballads is the fault of the mother, right? That she's done something wrong and therefore monstrosity comes upon her. So, where are we going with all of this connection, right, between morals and monstrosity? Well, to Richard III. The subtitle of this lecture is The Stories We Tell Ourselves. Our whole class on disability literature began with this work by J. Dolmage, An Archive and Anatomy of Disability Myths. And so we talked about how those myths are stories that we tell ourselves and retell that shape the way that we think about disability within our society. Shakespeare's Richard III is one of those stories, and we will talk about the way that telling this story of Richard III shapes both early modern England and also our current conception of the body and monstrosity. So we want to begin with who Richard III was and why Shakespeare wrote about him. Richard III was a monarch in medieval England. He was the last king before the Tudor dynasty came about. And Shakespeare was alive and writing during the Tudor dynasty. His monarch was Elizabeth I and then James I. So, in order to talk about this history, who Richard III is, and why Shakespeare is writing about him, we need to talk about the difference between actual history and history plays. Shakespeare's Richard III was first published in 1597. It was performed before that. This quarto calls the play a tragedy. You can see that the whole title is The Tragedy of King Richard III. And we will definitely talk about that genre designation. But most people call it a history. And indeed, the play is based in history. So let's take care of that first. The English succession is not something that you need to memorize. However, the trouble of the succession, the complication of the succession is very much a part of the story of Richard III historically and in Shakespeare's history. Family is complicated, power is complicated, and lives and bodies are complicated too. And we will see how literature can help to compound these complications.